The vast majority of human beings spend the entirety of their existence attempting to reshape their external circumstances. They transition between different careers, migrate to new cities, swap out relationships, and adjust their daily schedules, goals, appearances, and even their very personas. Nevertheless, deep within the core of their being, something remains stubbornly static. The identical insecurities return, the same anxieties emerge once more, and the same destructive cycles continue to play out. This occurs not because the universe is conspiring against the individual, but rather because the consciousness they bring into every new environment has never truly undergone a transformation. The mind represents the totality of our experience, not as a mere inspirational catchphrase or a superficial quote to be shared and discarded, but as a profound and often unsettling reality regarding the mechanics of human life. The ideas you dwell upon with consistency and repetition eventually become the specific lens through which you perceive the world around you. That very lens dictates every choice you select, every movement you make, and every consequence you encounter. You are not actually responding to objective reality. Instead, you are reacting to the specific significance your mind attaches to it. Two individuals might confront the exact same hurdle, yet one emerges more resilient while the other falls apart. The distinction is not found in intellect, fortune, or natural gift, but rather in the specific way the mind deciphers the unfolding moment. Most people never pause to interrogate this process. They mistakenly believe their thoughts are objective facts, they assume the internal monologue is conveying the absolute truth, and they conclude that their emotional impulses are inevitable. However, what if these assumptions are false? What if your mental narratives are not your true identity, but simply a series of patterns you have been rehearsing for decades without conscious awareness? Because that is the true nature of thought, it is a psychological habit, a mental ritual performed so frequently that it begins to feel like a natural law. If you have ever felt trapped, burdened, lacking in drive, or frustrated by your own progress, this is not evidence that you are inherently flawed. Rather, it serves as proof that your mind has been conditioned toward a specific path, and anything that has been conditioned can be reconditioned. This audio experience is not intended to provide temporary excitement, nor will it offer the illusion of an instant metamorphosis or suggest that blind optimism alone will solve your problems. Instead, it serves as an invitation to decelerate and observe how your internal machinery actually functions when no one is looking. It asks you to witness the subtle structures quietly defining your days and to understand how minor, recurring thoughts eventually construct an entire biography. Your existence is not the product of a single monumental verdict. It is the culmination of thousands of microscopic mental preferences made every single hour. What you focus on, what you permit, what you mentally replay, and what you tell yourself when reality fails to meet your expectations, all of these elements matter. Over time, these fleeting thoughts solidify into convictions, convictions evolve into actions, and actions eventually forge your destiny. Whether you realize it or not, throughout the next hour, you will not be pressured to transform into a stranger. Instead, you will be encouraged to become more aware, more intentional, and more accountable for the internal landscape that is projecting your external world. This process is not about policing every single idea that passes through your head. It is about deciding which specific narratives are worthy of your vital energy. The second you grasp this concept, a fundamental shift occurs. You cease to feel like a victim of circumstance and begin to see that your mind has been the architect of your reality all along. The mind is the source of everything, and you ultimately become the manifestation of your thoughts. This exploration is an honest call to look within with sincerity, composure, and bravery. Remain grounded, listen with intent, and allow these concepts to intersect with your personal history. What you encounter here is not abstract speculation, but a mirror reflecting your truth and a doorway toward clarity, power, and enduring internal autonomy. In our opening chapter, we explore the truth that your thoughts are never neutral. Most individuals operate under the delusion that their internal reflections are harmless, assuming that thinking is merely a background activity similar to white noise that one simply learns to ignore. A passing moment of uncertainty feels minor, a silent grievance seems trivial, and a repetitive excuse appears justifiable. However, the reality is far more consequential. Every thought you permit to take up residence has a trajectory. It is either propelling you toward growth or quietly anchoring you to the past. There is no such thing as a thought that lacks impact. Every mental spark carries weight and leaves a lasting impression on your psyche. When you tell yourself that you are incapable, a part of your spirit retreats. When you decide to delay action until later, your drive evaporates. When you tell yourself that failure is your constant companion, your mind begins to filter reality to find proof for that claim. Thoughts do not remain dormant. They are active forces that mold your perception and dictate your behavior long before you are even conscious of the shift. While many live as though their thoughts are private and without consequence, the mind is actually the primary command center for your entire life. Whatever dominates that space dictates how you communicate, how you navigate the world, how you reach conclusions, and how you behave when the pressure mounts. Long before success or failure manifests in your outer environment, the seeds have already germinated in your inner world. Consider your consciousness as a democratic system where every recurring thought represents a vote for the person you are evolving into. A single vote may appear insignificant, but the accumulation of thousands of votes over time produces a definitive result. Self-assurance is not a one-time choice. It is a tapestry of thoughts woven together until they feel like second nature. The same principle applies to terror, hesitation, self-control, and doubt. You do not simply wake up one morning lacking a sense of purpose. You arrive at that destination slowly through the thoughts you entertained yesterday, last month, and last year. You tolerated them because they felt familiar, and you believed them because they sounded like your own voice. Over time, they constructed a version of reality that feels unchangeable, even when it is entirely fluid. This is where true awareness begins. The moment you recognize that your thoughts are not neutral, you reclaim your sense of agency. Responsibility is not an admission of guilt, it is a reclamation of power. It signifies that you are no longer a helpless spectator of your inner life, but an active architect. You begin to observe how a solitary thought can alter the entire frequency of your day. Notice what occurs when your mind drifts toward the negative, your vitality wanes, your physical presence shrinks, and every task feels more grueling. Now observe the shift when your thinking becomes purposeful, not through forced happiness, but through rooted clarity. Your body reacts differently, your focus intensifies, and taking action feels more fluid. This is not a matter of luck, it is a direct relationship of cause and effect. Most people wait for a feeling of motivation to arrive before they take the first step, but motivation is actually the byproduct of thinking, not the origin. When your thoughts are weak, your drive vanishes. When your thoughts are supportive, action becomes a natural progression. This is precisely why true discipline always starts within the mind. Pay close attention to the specific vocabulary of your inner world. Words like always, never, or impossible may seem small, but they are the quiet architects of your limitations. They shrink your potential and narrow your horizons, eventually teaching you to settle for less than you are capable of. Your thoughts are essentially training your nervous system on how to interact with the world. Repeated thoughts of stress create a state of chronic tension, while repeated thoughts of defeat cultivate a habit of hesitation. Conversely, repeated thoughts of focus build a foundation of stability. You are constantly training yourself, whether you intend to or not. This chapter is not a demand to govern every single fleeting idea, as that would be an impossible burden. Instead, it is an invitation to identify the direction in which your thoughts are moving. Ask yourself, does this specific thought empower me or diminish me? Does it broaden my horizons or restrict my path? Does it lead me toward movement or trap me in stagnation? Once you begin to ask superior questions, your cognitive patterns begin to evolve. You start to realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the observer of habits you have practiced, and habits can be replaced. The moment you stop treating every internal narrative as an absolute fact, those narratives lose their power over you. You are no longer required to follow every inner impulse. You can pause, you can decide, and you can change course. This is the bedrock of mental fortitude. Your life will never exceed the quality of the thoughts you allow to persist, but it can ascend the very moment you become conscious of the process. Every idea matters, every habit counts, and from this second forward, your awareness is your greatest asset. Your thoughts are not neutral, they are actively designing you in this very moment. Well before any tangible transformation manifests in your external reality, the foundation has already been established within the depths of your inner landscape. It is helpful to visualize your consciousness as a democratic mechanism where every recurring reflection represents a ballot cast for the individual you are gradually becoming. While a solitary vote may seem inconsequential in isolation, the accumulation of thousands of these mental endorsements over a lifetime produces a definitive and undeniable outcome. Self-assurance is rarely the result of a single, monumental resolution. Rather, it is a complex architecture of mental habits rehearsed until they become as natural as breathing. The same logic applies to the development of anxiety, indecision, self-control, or profound uncertainty. You do not simply awaken one morning to find yourself devoid of purpose. You arrive at that state of being incrementally, fueled by the mental permissions you granted yesterday, last month, and throughout the preceding years. You allowed these narratives to persist because they felt comfortable, and you accepted them as truth because they echoed your own inner voice. Consequently, these patterns constructed a version of existence that appears unalterable, even though it remains entirely fluid. This realization serves as the precise point where true awareness is born. The second you understand that no thought is ever neutral, you effectively reclaim your personal agency. Taking responsibility in this context is not an act of self-reproach, but a profound reclamation of power. It signifies that you are no longer a helpless spectator of your internal world, but have become an intentional architect of your own experience. You begin to observe with precision how a single mental shift can alter the entire frequency of your day. Observe the transformation when the mind drifts toward the cynical, your vitality vanishes, your physical posture collapses, and every obligation feels significantly more taxing. In contrast, notice the shift when your cognition becomes deliberate, not through forced positivity, but through grounded and focused clarity. The physical body responds in kind, the intellect sharpens, and the path to action becomes remarkably more direct. This phenomenon is not a coincidence, it is the fundamental law of cause and effect in motion. While most individuals wait for a surge of motivation before they commit to movement, true motivation is actually a byproduct of specific thinking patterns rather than the initial spark. When your thoughts drain you, your drive evaporates, but when your internal dialogue supports your goals, action becomes a natural and effortless progression. This is the core reason why true discipline is always rooted in the mind before it ever reaches the hands. Furthermore, it is essential to pay close attention to the specific vocabulary of your internal monologue. Absolute terms like always, never, impossible, or too late may appear minor, but they act as silent gatekeepers that quietly shut doors on your potential. They systematically restrict your available options and narrow the horizons of your world, eventually conditioning you to expect far less from your own life. Your thoughts are essentially training your nervous system on how to interact with reality. Persistent thoughts of stress maintain a state of chronic physical tension, while repetitive defeatist narratives cultivate a deep-seated habit of hesitation. Conversely, consistent and focused mental energy builds a foundation of psychological stability. You are essentially training yourself every moment, regardless of whether you are doing so intentionally. This exploration is not demanding that you govern every fleeting impulse, an impossible task, but it is asking you to recognize the trajectory of your mental energy. You must ask yourself, does this specific thought empower my spirit or diminish my strength? Does it expand the landscape of my choices or cause my world to shrink? Does it propel me toward meaningful engagement, or pull me deeper into the cycle of delay? Once you begin to pose more insightful questions, your cognitive framework starts to evolve. You begin to perceive that you are not synonymous with your thoughts. You are the observer of mental habits, and habits are inherently subject to change. The moment you stop treating every inner narrative as an absolute fact, those narratives lose their psychological authority over you. You are no longer obligated to obey every internal command instinctively. Instead, you learn to pause, evaluate, and redirect your focus. This is the very bedrock of psychological resilience. Your life will never transcend the quality of the thoughts you permit on a daily basis, but it can ascend the very instant you become conscious of the process. Every idea is significant, every pattern carries weight, and from this point forward, your awareness becomes your greatest competitive advantage. Your thoughts are far from neutral. They are actively sculpting your future in this very moment. Moving into our second chapter, we must confront the invisible scripts that are quietly governing your existence. The majority of people move through their days under the illusion that they are making entirely independent and conscious choices. They believe they are deciding how to respond to challenges, what ambitions to chase, and when to walk away. However, beneath the surface of these visible decisions, a much quieter system is in operation, invisible mental blueprints that direct our behavior without our explicit permission. These scripts feel inherent, automatic, and deeply familiar, which is precisely why they exert such an immense influence over us. They were written during our formative years, often long before we possessed the linguistic tools to question their validity. You absorb these instructions from your family dynamics, academic pressures, societal standards, and early repeated experiences. You learned which behaviors secured validation, which ones invited disapproval, and what was required to ensure your emotional safety. You were taught when to speak up, when to remain invisible, and which aspects of your personality were deemed acceptable by others. Over time, these early lessons solidified into deep-seated assumptions that you likely never consciously selected. They became your internal default settings, quietly dictating the intensity of your effort, your willingness to take risks, and the depth of your personal desires. Because these scripts function below the threshold of conscious thought, they are frequently mistaken for permanent personality traits. You might find yourself saying, "This is simply who I am," when in reality, you are describing a series of rehearsed responses and familiar patterns that have been reinforced so often they feel like biological destiny. One script might whisper that you should never draw attention to yourself, while another might insist that your worth is tied to constant achievement. Another might warn you that any failure will lead to inevitable rejection. These messages rarely manifest as complete sentences. Instead, they appear as sudden hesitation, physical tension, or a subtle tightening in the chest. This happens because the human mind instinctively prefers familiarity over truth. Even a painful or destructive pattern feels safer than the terrifying uncertainty of the unknown. This explains why you can desperately desire change and yet find yourself resisting it with equal force. One part of your being reaches toward growth while another clings to an archaic script designed for basic survival rather than true fulfillment. If you examine your personal history with honesty, you will likely notice a pattern of repetition, similar conflicts involving different people, familiar emotional spirals triggered by new circumstances, and invisible ceilings that you seem to hit repeatedly. These occurrences are not random coincidences. They are clear indicators that an outdated script is still running in the background of your mind. Your consciousness learned these patterns at a time when they actually served a purpose. Perhaps they protected you from social embarrassment, emotional disappointment, or the pain of rejection. At one stage of your life, they were functional survival mechanisms, but protection inevitably becomes a limitation when it remains unexamined as you grow. Awareness serves as the fundamental beginning of your liberation. The moment you can observe a reaction within yourself before you move to justify it, a profound shift takes place. You create a vital space between the initial impulse and the eventual action. Within that small, quiet space, the power of true choice finally becomes possible. This particular section does not demand that you cast judgment upon your history or reprimand yourself for the lessons you previously internalized. Rather, it serves as a gentle invitation to witness your internal reactions with a sense of profound curiosity. Start to pay attention to those instances where your emotional response feels disproportionately large compared to the actual event, or when a sense of resistance emerges without any logical explanation. When that well-worn internal monologue whispers that you should avoid effort or that a particular path is far too perilous, simply pause and inquire into the origins of that voice. There is no requirement for exhaustive psychological analysis. The objective is merely to acknowledge that this voice is a learned behavior rather than an objective reality. The very second you identify a script for what it truly is, its psychological stranglehold begins to diminish. You no longer mistake your past conditioning for your actual identity, and you earn the vital capacity to respond with intention rather than reacting on impulse. This is the authentic genesis of transformation. It is not achieved through sheer force of will or fleeting motivation, but through the quiet power of awareness. Each time you detect an old narrative attempting to take control and you choose a different path, you systematically erode its influence. You are not tasked with deleting your past, you are here to prevent it from dictating the terms of your future. Every internal script is subject to revision, but only by the individual who is conscious enough to see it in motion. As you progress through this experience, hold on to this realization with kindness toward yourself. There is absolutely nothing broken within you. You simply adapted, learned, and survived your circumstances. Now, however, you are mastering the art of conscious choice, and that agency begins the moment you shine a light on the hidden blueprints defining your day-to-day life. These scripts do not lose their influence through aggressive resistance, but through the clarity of understanding. Every time you hesitate instead of obeying an automatic impulse, you are reinforcing the truth that the present moment is distinct from your history. You are no longer that vulnerable version of yourself reacting from old memories. You are a capable adult possessing the power of direction and the potential for expansion. Through steady patience and regular practice, fresh mental patterns will naturally begin to take shape. These new ways of being might feel strange or uncomfortable initially, because true freedom often carries a sense of the unknown, but unfamiliarity should not be confused with danger. It is merely uncharted territory awaiting your arrival. As this state of awareness matures, you will begin to see how often you sabotage your own efforts before they even begin, or how frequently you predict negative outcomes before they materialize. These realizations are not failures, they are invitations to return to the now. Each time you favor presence over habit, you reclaim a fragment of your true self. This process is not a dramatic explosion of change but a subtle and authentic accumulation of moments. Over time, these small victories build a new internal terrain where deliberate choice becomes your baseline and ancient scripts gradually dissolve into the background. You are not fractured, you are simply awakening, and that is where the true journey begins. Moving forward into our third chapter, we must address why the traditional concept of positive thinking is fundamentally insufficient. For decades, society has promoted the idea that optimistic thoughts are the ultimate remedy for all human struggles. People are told to simply think positively so that their circumstances will magically improve, to swap out every dark reflection for an uplifting one, and to smile through every hardship. This guidance sounds incredibly promising, and it can indeed offer a momentary sense of relief, or a temporary illusion of mastery over one's life. However, for the vast majority of people, this approach quietly collapses the moment real-world pressure is applied. Positive thinking is inherently fragile because it is tethered to one's mood, and human moods are notoriously unstable. You might feel a surge of optimism in the quiet of the morning, only to find yourself completely drowned by stress by the afternoon. You may believe in your potential during times of peace, yet lose that conviction the instant a genuine obstacle appears. This is not a sign of personal inadequacy, it is a fundamental flaw in the methodology itself. Positivity that lacks a solid internal structure cannot endure the weight of adversity. The human mind does not undergo lasting change simply because a thought sounds pleasant. It transforms through the rigorous application of repetition, evidence, and mental discipline. Furthermore, most individuals do not suffer because their thoughts are inherently negative, but because their cognitive patterns lack any sense of consistency. One moment they feel entirely capable, and the next they are paralyzed by total self-doubt. Their internal world fluctuates wildly between optimism and terror, or between high motivation and complete avoidance. Without a foundation of stability, the mind is unable to cultivate true resilience. Mental fortitude is not defined by the total absence of negative thoughts, but by the presence of cognitive control. A mind that has been properly trained does not ask how it feels in the moment. Instead, it asks which thought will lead to a responsible and effective action right now. That shift in perspective is the boundary between mere comfort and genuine growth. While positive thinking attempts to bypass or eliminate discomfort entirely, disciplined thinking acknowledges the discomfort and chooses to move through it anyway. One approach seeks emotional escape, while the other pursues absolute clarity. This is precisely why relying solely on a positive mindset often results in deep exhaustion. You find yourself trapped in a constant struggle to feel better rather than focusing on becoming stronger. When individuals who rely on positivity encounter significant barriers, they often feel a sense of profound betrayal because they did everything right and stayed hopeful, yet reality refused to yield. What they truly lacked was not a lack of belief, but a lack of mental architecture. Discipline provides the necessary framework for the mind, offering the ability to steer your thoughts even when your emotions are pulling in the opposite direction. It allows you to prioritize clarity over the volatility of impulse. True discipline does not function by denying the existence of fear. Instead, it places that fear into its proper perspective. It does not attempt to silence the voice of doubt, but rather prevents that doubt from becoming the primary decision-maker in your life. Resilient thinkers recognize that their internal reflections are merely instruments, not absolute commands. When a cynical or discouraging thought emerges, they do not succumb to panic, nor do they try to bury it under a layer of artificial optimism. Instead, they scrutinize it, deciding with intention whether that particular thought is worthy of their focus. This practice establishes a profound internal equilibrium. While optimism relies on the hope that external conditions will brighten, discipline equips you to perform effectively regardless of how the situation unfolds. Most individuals wait for a surge of self-assurance before they are willing to act, but those with a disciplined mindset understand that confidence is the byproduct of movement, not the starting line. They initiate action even in the presence of hesitation, and over time, this teaches the mind to rely on its own capabilities. The human consciousness learns through direct experience. When you choose to act despite your anxiety, you are effectively instructing your nervous system that discomfort is a survivable state. Conversely, when you pause and withdraw, you are teaching it that avoidance is the only path to safety. Eventually, your mind will adapt to whichever of these two lessons you rehearse most frequently. Positive thinking that lacks a corresponding action provides no tangible evidence for the mind to hold on to, whereas disciplined movement creates undeniable proof of your strength. This exploration is not an invitation to become emotionally hollow or detached. Rather, it is a call to stop relying on feeling good as a requirement for making progress. Emotions are merely biological signals, not a set of instructions for behavior. When feelings dictate your actions, life becomes erratic and volatile. When discipline steers your thinking, life acquires a sense of stability. This stability does not imply that things become easy, but it does mean you become reliable. It ensures you can maintain clarity of thought even during the most grueling circumstances. Observe how your cognitive patterns shift when you are under significant pressure. This shift occurs not because of an inherent weakness, but because you may have never been trained in the art of holding your internal ground. This is a skill that can be cultivated with intent. Start by noticing those moments when you instinctively reach for comfort instead of pursuing clarity. Pay attention to when you sidestep a difficult choice by telling yourself a convenient lie that everything will be fine, or when you choose distraction over deliberate focus. Every one of these moments is a chance for mental conditioning. Ask yourself which specific thought will assist you in acting with integrity in the present moment. Do not look for what feels the most pleasant, or what sounds the most inspiring. Look for what moves you forward with responsibility. Initially, this level of disciplined thinking will feel foreign and perhaps even painful, as your old habits will naturally resist the change. However, you must remember that discomfort is not a sign of danger, it is the physical evidence that growth is occurring. With consistent practice, your mind becomes more grounded, less reactive, and significantly more focused. You stop pursuing the fleeting high of motivation and begin to build the unstoppable engine of momentum. Confidence ceases to be a hope and becomes something you actively generate. While positive thinking might offer a temporary emotional lift, disciplined thinking provides a permanent increase in power. Once you witness this distinction, you realize that true mental authority does not stem from blind optimism, but from the rigorous training of the mind to see clearly, especially when it would be far easier to look away. In our fourth chapter, we explore how focus has quietly emerged as the most essential and scarce form of power in the contemporary world. You are currently existing within an environment saturated by constant sensory stimulation. Notifications, digital messages, global news, entertainment, and a relentless flood of opinions are all competing for your cognitive energy every hour of the day. It is vital to understand that none of this is a coincidence. Your surroundings have been meticulously engineered to draw your awareness outward, fragmenting your attention and keeping you in a perpetual state of reaction rather than allowing you to direct your own path. Most people assume their primary struggle is a lack of willpower or drive, but the underlying crisis is a lack of concentrated focus. When your attention is scattered, your energy is diluted, and when your energy is diluted, your progress becomes sluggish, erratic, and easily disrupted. Regardless of your natural intelligence or your level of ambition, focus remains the ultimate filter of your reality. Focus is not just about concentration, it is about deliberate direction. Whatever you choose to nourish with your attention will inevitably expand in significance, intensity, and emotional power. If your focus remains fixed on your anxieties, those anxieties will grow. If it dwells on comparison, your sense of inadequacy will deepen. However, when your focus is anchored in progress, learning, and intentional effort, a lasting sense of self-assurance begins to take root. While your external environment might remain entirely stagnant, your actual experience of existence undergoes a total metamorphosis when you master the art of concentration. A scattered consciousness exists in a perpetual state of reaction, instinctively responding to whatever appears most audible, most novel, or most pressing in the moment. It leaps from one reflection to another and from task to task, lacking any sense of depth or internal continuity. This relentless shifting of focus serves only to deplete your mental vitality. You can remain occupied for the entire day and yet find yourself feeling curiously empty, as if no significant progress was truly achieved. This specific type of fatigue is not a byproduct of genuine labor, but rather a consequence of fragmentation. Every time you permit your attention to drift unnecessarily, there is a hidden psychological price to pay. Your momentum is fractured and your clarity begins to dissolve. Eventually, the mind becomes conditioned to crave stimulation rather than purpose, and noise rather than profound significance. This leads to a sense of restlessness that persists even when there is no objective reason for distress. In contrast, a focused consciousness feels fundamentally more grounded. It is tranquil, stable, and significantly less prone to emotional volatility. When your awareness settles on a single focal point, the complexity of decision-making diminishes, internal friction fades, and your actions become noticeably more precise and intentional. Focus serves to reduce the internal resistance that usually traps you, allowing your energy to flow toward a specific goal rather than dissipating into the void. Furthermore, maintaining focus is not synonymous with ignoring your duties or withdrawing from reality. Rather, it is the act of selecting your priorities with total consciousness. When you treat every demand as if it carries the same weight of importance, you effectively ensure that nothing truly matters. The mind becomes paralyzed not because the world asks too much of us, but because we have failed to establish internal boundaries. Observe the physical manifestations in your body when your attention is being tugged in several directions simultaneously. Your muscles likely contract, your respiration becomes superficial, and your thoughts begin to accelerate. Now, contrast that with the physical sensation of being entirely immersed in a single objective or idea. Your nervous system finds its equilibrium, your breathing slows and deepens, and your sense of presence expands. This is the optimal state in which the human mind and body were designed to operate. Most individuals relinquish control over their attention without even noticing the theft. They permit digital interfaces, rigid schedules, and the expectations of others to dictate what is worthy of their mental energy. Consequently, they lead reactive lives, consuming a mountain of information without ever distilling it into meaning. The cultivation of focus begins with a single, penetrating inquiry. Is this specific thing truly deserving of my awareness right now? Is this path leading me toward the existence I intend to create, or is it subtly drawing me into stagnation? Very few individuals possess the discipline to pause long enough to ask this, and even fewer are prepared to answer it with total sincerity. Focus must be viewed as a technical skill rather than an inherent personality trait, and like any skill, it grows stronger through consistent application. Every time you successfully resist a trivial distraction, your clarity is refined. Each time you persist with a difficult task longer than is comfortable, your mental endurance is bolstered. Each time you prioritize depth over superficial stimulation, your mind becomes more unwavering. While a distracted mind is always hunting for the next novelty, a focused mind is on a quest for significance. True competence, self-assurance, and internal trust are constructed through the steady application of attention over time, rather than through sudden, erratic explosions of effort. Focus is the mechanism that allows your labor to compound and grow. You can begin this process in a small way. Select one single task, one specific intention, or one thought that is worth your devotion, and remain with it entirely. Pay attention to the sudden impulse to escape or distract yourself, acknowledging that this urge is merely a habit and not a signal of genuine threat. Allow that impulse to wash over you without acting upon it. With enough repetition, focus ceases to feel like a forced exertion and begins to feel like a natural state of alignment. You will find yourself feeling less fragmented and more unified as a person. You stop being a person to whom life simply happens and begin to act as the deliberate architect of your journey. Ultimately, focus is not about the quantity of your output, it is about the quality of your presence. When your attention becomes a conscious choice, your personal power returns to you, quietly, steadily, and with absolute certainty. This internal authority does not demand recognition through loud proclamations. It doesn't arrive with a burst of adrenaline or dramatic intensity. Instead, it manifests as a quiet, steady consistency. You see it in the newfound capacity to bring tasks to completion, to maintain focus when the initial excitement fades into boredom, and to remain centered when the world attempts to pull your attention elsewhere. Over time, this disciplined awareness begins to fundamentally reshape your identity. You start to reclaim trust in your own word, feeling genuinely capable of sustained persistence, and gaining a sharp clarity regarding what truly earns a place in your life. Within that clarity, an authentic self-assurance flourishes, not a confidence born of fleeting moods or desperate hope, but one anchored in the undeniable evidence that you can direct your own consciousness, energy, and destiny with deliberate intent. This is the process by which silent discipline matures into an unshakable internal fortress. Moving into our fifth chapter, we examine how your internal monologue eventually crystallizes into your sense of self. Every single day, whether you are consciously aware of it or not, you are engaged in an unending psychological conversation. This dialogue never truly pauses. It narrates the silence, intensifies under pressure, weighs in before every choice, and reacts instantly following every stumble. It offers commentary, passes judgment, predicts outcomes, provides encouragement, warns of danger, and explains the world to you. Eventually, this inner voice becomes so ingrained that you stop perceiving it as a separate entity. You begin to experience it as objective truth, as a reliable compass, and ultimately, as your very identity. The specific manner in which you address yourself is the primary tool that carves out the person you are becoming. This voice is far more than background noise. It is a set of operating instructions. It defines the boundaries of the possible, identifies the presence of risk, determines what is socially acceptable, and signals when a situation is beyond hope. When this voice is relentless and harsh, the world feels like a burden. When it is erratic and disorganized, life feels precarious. But when it is composed and grounded, existence begins to feel manageable and transparent. Most people harbor the belief that their internal voice is a natural reflection of their soul, but in reality, it is a reflection of their history. It is a product of environmental conditioning, repeated messages, and significant emotional events. It adopted its tone from guardians, educators, authority figures, and companions. It absorbed the echoes of past failures and the sting of old disappointments. Over the years, these external voices merged into an internalized narrative that now provides the commentary for your life. When you encounter a setback, observe with precision what that voice says. Does it offer a calm correction, or does it launch a personal assault on your character? When you face the unknown, does it provide patient guidance, or does it paralyze you with intimidation? When effort is required, does it fuel your persistence, or does it rush toward a dismissive judgment? These patterns are vital because the voice you entertain most frequently becomes the blueprint for your reality. A voice defined by constant criticism breeds a life of fear, a voice of perpetual doubt ensures a life of delay, and a voice of relentless pressure leads inevitably to exhaustion. None of these internal critics provide genuine strength. They only deplete your energy, warp your perception, and erode self-trust. In time, these narratives convince your nervous system that exertion is a threat. Your body reacts to your internal speech as if it were coming from an external source of power. Aggressive self-talk triggers a physiological stress response, while a supportive internal tone fosters biological stability. Your physical being is a dedicated listener to the nuances of your internal atmosphere. When the voice feels predatory, your body prepares to fight or hide. When the voice remains steady, your body stays receptive and focused. This is precisely why personal evolution can feel so draining. You aren't just modifying a habit, you are challenging a voice that has been the lead architect of your psyche for years. Resistance occurs not because growth is wrong, but because you are disrupting a very old sense of familiarity. Your inner voice defines your identity through the sheer force of repetition. What you say to yourself on a Tuesday morning eventually becomes what you believe is true about your potential on a Wednesday. These beliefs dictate your actions, and those actions provide the proof that reinforces the belief. While this cycle can feel permanent, it is actually a learned habit that can be retrained. This isn't achieved by trying to force the voice into silence or masking it with hollow affirmations. Instead, it is retrained through the process of refinement. A truly powerful inner voice is neither delusional nor cruel. It is sincere, precise, and constructive, offering the correction of a mentor without ever attacking the integrity of the person. Start by observing the tonal quality of your internal monologue rather than the specific content. Pay close attention to how that voice addresses you, not merely what it communicates. Does it tend toward exaggeration? Does it rely on sweeping generalizations? Does it attempt to label your entire character instead of simply describing a specific action? These psychological habits can be disrupted through the power of awareness. When that voice asserts that you always fail, intervene with objective accuracy. This specific attempt did not yield the desired result. When it insists you are not ready, replace that narrative with responsibility. I can choose to prepare and then I can try. This is not an exercise in blind positivity, it is an exercise in precision. Precision is the foundation upon which internal trust is constructed over time. A more composed inner voice fosters a sense of internal safety. When you feel secure within your own mind, you become capable of taking healthier risks, you bounce back from errors with greater speed, and you remain grounded under intense pressure rather than retreating inward. This is the quiet architecture of confidence, built through recurring instances of fair and honest self-guidance. Your internal voice does not need to be an aggressive motivator, it needs to be a reliable guide. Visualize it as a leader rather than a critic. True leaders provide direction without the need for humiliation, they prioritize improvement over punishment. As you proceed on this path, hold tightly to this reality, you eventually embody the person you describe to yourself. Select that voice with profound care, for it will mold your resilience, your diligence, your self-esteem, and your ultimate destiny more effectively than any external force ever could. Each time you intentionally adjust your internal tone, you erode ancient conditioning and fortify your capacity for self-leadership. This evolution requires immense patience. That voice will not undergo a total metamorphosis in a single night, as it was constructed over decades. But steady consistency is far more vital than a sudden burst of intensity. Minor corrections, rehearsed daily, eventually reshape the core of your identity. When your internal monologue becomes equitable, unwavering, and grounded, your actions will naturally align with that state. Effort begins to feel less burdensome, decisions acquire a newfound transparency, and you cease the exhausting war against yourself, beginning instead a process of cooperation with your own mind. That internal alliance becomes a source of silent power, propelling you forward even when the path is shrouded in doubt or difficulty. This alignment is the bedrock of enduring self-assurance and psychological equilibrium. In our 6th chapter, we confront the truth that thoughts, not external events, are the true architects of emotion. Most individuals harbor the conviction that their feelings are the direct result of their circumstances. They claim a specific situation made them angry, or an event destroyed their mood, or that their anxiety is a direct consequence of an outside occurrence. This perspective feels intuitive because emotions often ignite the very second an event takes place, but what feels intuitive is not always factual. Circumstances do not manufacture emotions, interpretations do. Between an event and your emotional response, there is always a layer of meaning. The mind assigns a significance first, and the emotion follows that lead. Consider how two people can encounter the exact same obstacle and experience entirely different internal states. One may feel energized by the challenge while the other feels crushed by defeat. One may feel a sense of curiosity while the other feels fundamentally threatened. If emotions were the direct offspring of events, such a divergence would be impossible. The variable is not the circumstance itself, but the specific meaning each consciousness attaches to it. Your emotions are reactions to your personal interpretations, not to objective reality. This distinction is monumental because it identifies exactly where your power resides. If external events dictate your emotional landscape, you remain a permanent hostage to fortune, your inner peace rising and falling with factors beyond your control. However, if you accept that thoughts generate emotions, then emotional stability becomes a skill you can master internally. Most emotional distress is the result of automatic, unexamined interpretations. These thoughts manifest with such velocity that they often bypass your conscious awareness. You might not hear a literal sentence saying, "I am a failure," yet you feel the suffocating weight of discouragement. You may not consciously think, "I am in danger," but your body constricts with the tension of anxiety. The emotion feels abrupt and spontaneous, yet it always has a cognitive origin. These thoughts are deeply rehearsed patterns. Your mind has spent years practicing specific labels for situations it deems perilous, embarrassing, unjust, or hopeless. Over time, these labels have become instinctive triggers for immediate emotional responses. This does not imply that your emotions are wrong. Feelings are vital signals that communicate how your mind is currently deciphering the world. However, when emotions are treated as undeniable facts, they begin to hijack your behavior. You start to act as if the feeling itself is proof of an objective reality. It is essential to remember that an emotion is a reaction, not an order. When you believe your feelings are caused by the outside world, you exhaust yourself trying to manipulate that world just to find relief. You avoid certain people, you pathologically seek reassurance, or you drown yourself in distraction. While these tactics might provide a fleeting respite, they never solve the underlying issue because the internal interpretations remain untouched. When you finally grasp that your thoughts are the source of your emotions, a revolutionary approach becomes available to you. Instead of battling the feeling, you begin to interrogate the meaning behind it. You ask a deceptively simple yet transformative question. What narrative am I spinning for myself in this moment? This inquiry creates a vital psychological space. Within that space, the intensity of the emotion often begins to soften, not because the external situation has changed, but because your awareness has successfully interrupted the automatic loop. You eventually cease to be swept away by the initial, instinctive narrative and reclaim the power to select a more precise interpretation. This is not a project of forcing superficial optimism. It is the rigorous questioning of beliefs you have long accepted without examination. When anxiety emerges, you no longer engage in an internal argument or attempt to suppress it. Instead, you investigate its origins. When resentment flares, you do not deny its existence, but rather explore the specific conviction that is fueling the fire. Through consistent practice, this approach cultivates a profound emotional resilience. You stop fearing your internal states because you finally understand their mechanics. You come to realize that discomfort is not a synonym for danger, it is simply a signal that your attention is required. Your nervous system begins to find its equilibrium as it recognizes that you are listening with intent rather than reacting with panic. Emotional regulation, therefore, evolves from a struggle for control into a process of deep understanding. You stop battling your internal experience and start extracting wisdom from it. This represents the essence of emotional maturity. You no longer hold the external world accountable for your feelings, but instead take full responsibility for how you choose to interpret that world. Responsibility, in this context, is not an admission of guilt, it is an act of ownership. It is the recognition that your internal landscape deserves your dedicated care, clarity, and uncompromising honesty. As you progress, hold this truth close. While you cannot govern every external event or predict every possible outcome, you can master the art of noticing the thoughts that ignite before an emotion hijacks your behavior. When you achieve this, emotions transform from obstacles into guides. They point toward profound insight rather than chaotic reaction. You become less impulsive and more responsive. You learn to pause before you act, choosing to craft a meaningful narrative instead of blindly accepting the first story your mind presents. This shift does not erase your capacity to feel. It fundamentally transforms your relationship with feeling. By practicing this daily, the very fabric of your life begins to change. You start to feel more unwavering, even when your circumstances are shrouded in uncertainty. You remain grounded in the face of challenges, trusting your ability to navigate emotional surges rather than being submerged by them. This understanding offers you a genuine form of liberation, not freedom from emotion, but freedom within it. It is the autonomy to feel deeply without losing your internal compass, to experience pain without collapsing, and to remain present and thoughtful in moments that once exerted total control over you. When you grasp that your thoughts are the architects of your emotions, you reclaim the authorship of your inner world, and that authorship quietly redefines how you live, decide, and move forward, one moment at a time. Moving into our 7th chapter, we address the invisible toll of unmanaged cognition. Most people are convinced that their greatest burdens are external: the pressures of a career, financial instability, fractured relationships, or a lack of time and opportunity. While these factors are significant, they are not the primary source of human exhaustion. The most profound cost usually stems from something far more constant and subtle: uncontrolled thinking. An undisciplined mind is a mind that never finds true rest. When your thoughts are allowed to run without a pilot, your mind remains hyperactive even when your body is perfectly still. You find yourself mentally replaying conversations that have long since concluded, or obsessively imagining future scenarios that have not yet arrived. You analyze past errors long after the actual lesson has been extracted and integrated. This level of mental activity often disguises itself as being productive, but it rarely is. It is an energy drain that provides zero clarity. This uncontrolled thinking generates emotional fatigue long before physical exhaustion ever sets in. Furthermore, overthinking does not solve problems, it systematically multiplies them. Every time you repeat a stressful thought, you add a new layer of physical tension to your body. Every imagined catastrophe increases your internal uncertainty until the mind begins to confuse a mere possibility with a statistical probability. What might happen starts to feel like what will happen. Anxiety flourishes in this environment, not because a real threat is present, but because your imagination is operating without any boundaries. This is one of the most significant hidden costs. Your nervous system is incapable of distinguishing between a tangible external threat and a vividly imagined internal one. When your thoughts are perpetually scanning the horizon for potential problems, your body remains trapped in a state of low-level fight or flight alert. Your muscles remain tight, your respiration stays shallow, and your focus begins to weaken. Over time, this state of high alert becomes your normal baseline. Another hidden cost is the paralysis of indecision. When your thinking lacks a structured framework, every choice feels impossibly heavy. You see too many variables and visualize too many negative outcomes. Instead of making a choice, you hesitate. Instead of taking action, you wait for a sense of absolute certainty that rarely, if ever, arrives. Consequently, life moves forward while you remain anchored in a cycle of endless analysis. Furthermore, uncontrolled cognitive activity serves as the primary fuel for self-sabotage. You often possess a clear understanding of what needs to be accomplished, yet an internal resistance emerges, leading you toward delay, distraction, and the rationalization of avoidance. This is not a symptom of laziness, it is the result of mental saturation. When the consciousness is cluttered with clashing reflections, taking action feels like an insurmountable burden. The toll continues to accumulate as your relationships begin to suffer under the weight of unmanaged thought. You find yourself misinterpreting dialogue, assuming hidden motives, and mentally replaying tones and expressions until their original meaning is warped. Minor disagreements are amplified, and misunderstandings flourish in the fertile ground of imagination rather than the clarity of communication. Consequently, self-assurance begins to wither. When the mind is in a constant state of self-interrogation, internal trust vanishes, leaving you to doubt your capacity to decide, to act, and to persist. Each instance of hesitation teaches the mind to hesitate further. Each avoidance of discomfort reinforces the habit of retreat. Over time, this repetitive cycle hardens into a false sense of identity. This exploration is not intended to be a critique of your character. Rather, it is designed to expose the steep price you may be paying without your conscious awareness. An undisciplined mind consumes the vital energy that is meant for your growth and hijacks the attention required for true presence. It transforms uncomplicated moments into exhausting internal conflicts. This cost is rarely a sudden catastrophe. It is a subtle, persistent drain that manifests as chronic fatigue, a lack of transparency in your thinking, and a nagging sensation of falling behind even when you are exerting yourself. The remedy is not to cease thinking, an impossible feat, but to learn to steer your thoughts. Mental discipline begins with the simple act of observation. Notice when your thoughts are merely circling in place rather than progressing. Identify when analysis has transformed into a sophisticated form of avoidance, and recognize when your imagination has turned into an adversary. Treat these moments as signals rather than failures. Pose simple, direct questions to your internal narrator. Is this specific thought assisting me in acting with integrity right now? Is it equipping me for action or paralyzing me with fear? Does it clarify the immediate next step or merely distract me from it? While uncontrolled thinking thrives in a state of vagueness, discipline introduces the power of precision. Instead of attempting to process your entire life at once, focus exclusively on the next requirement. Rather than trying to solve the enigma of the entire future, engage fully with the present obligation. This approach systematically reduces internal noise. As your discipline matures, your mind will begin to feel significantly lighter, not because it is empty, but because it is organized. You stop carrying the unnecessary weight of what ifs, and your vitality returns. This is the ultimate reward of mental mastery. You reclaim the territory inside your own head. You begin to navigate existence with less friction, moving from a state of reaction to a state of response. The hidden cost of an unmanaged mind is your very life force. When you regain authority over your attention, you regain your true self. Moving into our 8th chapter, we consider the mind as a muscle that can be trained. Your consciousness is not a fixed or fragile entity. It is not a static trait you are simply born with and forced to endure. Much like the physical body, the mind is highly adaptive. It evolves based on what it is repeatedly asked to perform. It grows more resilient with purposeful use, more fragile with neglect, and distorted through misuse. Whether you are aware of it or not, you are engaged in mental conditioning every single day. This training occurs through the power of repetition. Every time you rehearse a specific thought, you are reinforcing a neural pathway. Every time you respond to a situation in a familiar way, you are strengthening a behavioral pattern. Eventually, these patterns become so automatic they feel like a natural law, even when they are destructive. This is precisely why internal change feels so grueling at the start. You aren't fighting against an objective truth, you are simply interrupting a very deep-seated habit. Most individuals approach physical fitness with a high degree of intention, yet they allow their mental training to happen by accident. They saturate their minds with perpetual distraction, social comparison, and chronic stress, and then feel bewildered when focus seems impossible to achieve. They mentally rehearse anxiety, uncertainty, and self-reproach on a daily basis, and then wonder why their confidence feels so brittle. The mind is a mirror of its own practice. Mental conditioning does not begin with a surge of motivation, it begins with the establishment of structure. Just as physical power is developed through consistent and straightforward movements, mental fortitude is constructed through small, recurring acts of deliberate attention and conscious choice. You do not require elaborate or dramatic techniques. You simply need the steady application of regular discipline. It is helpful to visualize each day as a rigorous training session for your consciousness. What you choose to focus on is the weight you are lifting. What you repeat is the specific exercise you are performing. If you perpetually lift the mental weight of anxiety, your mind becomes exceptionally skilled at being fearful. Conversely, if you lift the weight of clarity, effort, and responsibility, your mind adapts to those demands accordingly. This is precisely why waiting for a sense of readiness is a flawed strategy. Readiness is the eventual byproduct of training, not a prerequisite for it. You condition the mind by showing up precisely when it would prefer to withdraw. You train it by remaining anchored when distractions pull at you. You refine it by selecting deliberate thought the moment automatic patterns emerge. Initially, this process will feel inherently uncomfortable. However, discomfort is not a signal of failure. It is the physical evidence that new mental muscles are being engaged. Your established habits will naturally resist this shift because the mind instinctively prioritizes efficiency over growth, preferring old neural pathways simply because they require less caloric energy. Genuine training demands effort before it ever offers a reward. In this pursuit, consistency is far more vital than intensity. A few minutes of intentional practice every day will reshape your psyche faster than rare, sporadic bursts of extreme exertion. As you return repeatedly to these foundational practices, stability begins to form, your attention span strengthens, and your emotional volatility starts to soften. Furthermore, training the mind also necessitates the discipline of rest. Just as physical muscles require recovery time to grow, the mind requires periods of silence. Stillness should not be mistaken for emptiness. It is the vital process of integration. When you permit yourself moments devoid of external stimulation, the mind begins to organize itself, and clarity naturally emerges as the noise level decreases. This chapter is an invitation to approach your internal landscape with profound patience. You are not attempting to dominate your thoughts through force, you are teaching them. You are demonstrating to your mind what truly matters by where you choose to place your focus. Progress in this area may feel agonizingly slow, but that is the nature of the work. Mental fortitude develops in the quiet moments. One day you realize you are less reactive. Another day you notice your recovery from a setback is faster. Eventually, you recognize a deep-seated trust in yourself. These changes are subtle, yet they are entirely real. Training the mind is not about achieving a state of perfection, it is about building reliability. You evolve into someone who can return to a state of clarity even after being distracted, and someone who can choose a thoughtful response over a blind reaction. This reliability eventually manifests as authentic inner confidence. When you treat the mind like a muscle, you cease expecting instantaneous results and begin to respect the process itself. You commit to the daily practice, and with time, your mind becomes more resilient, steady, and cooperative. This foundation allows you to construct a future that feels intentionally chosen and stable. Training also requires a clear sense of direction. Without it, your efforts will inevitably scatter. When you decide exactly what kind of consciousness you wish to build, your practice acquires a sense of purpose. You stop drifting through your days and start directing them. Each choice becomes a brick in a larger structure that moves you forward. There will certainly be days when the training feels futile, days when the mind resists and ancient habits resurface. These are not setbacks. They are an essential part of the developmental cycle. Strength is not developed by avoiding weakness, but by meeting it consistently. Over time, your relationship with effort will undergo a transformation. What once felt heavy will become normal, and what once required immense willpower will become routine. This is the silent power of conditioning. The mind you construct today determines the quality of the life you live tomorrow. With patience, repetition, and uncompromising honesty, mental training eventually reshapes your identity. You stop perceiving discipline as a form of self-punishment, and begin to see it as the ultimate act of self-care. You learn that guiding your mind is an act of profound self-respect, and within that respect, true strength flourishes, supporting you long after your initial motivation has faded. In our 9th chapter, we explore the relationship between stillness, silence, and the development of mental strength within a culture that is perpetually loud. In a culture that glorifies speed, constant noise, and the perpetual need for expression, the concept of stillness is frequently misunderstood. Silence is often misidentified as weakness, while a slower, more deliberate pace is confused with a lack of ambition. However, the most resilient minds in human history were characterized not by frantic reactivity, but by being deeply grounded. These individuals understood the profound power of the pause. They mastered the art of being still. It is vital to recognize that stillness is not synonymous with inactivity. Rather, it is a heightened form of internal control. A mind that cannot tolerate a moment of silence is a mind that is effectively being ruled, governed by fleeting impulses, constant distractions, and a pathological craving for external stimulation. When every quiet interval feels like an uncomfortable burden, the consciousness seeks an escape, reaching for digital noise or social chatter to avoid the confrontation with itself. Over time, this avoidance systematically erodes mental fortitude. Silence has a way of revealing what noise works so hard to conceal. When the external world finally quiets down, the inner world becomes audible. Suppressed thoughts begin to rise, buried emotions surface, and unresolved internal tensions appear. Many people pathologically avoid stillness for this exact reason. They are not actually afraid of the silence itself, but of what that silence inevitably unearths. Yet, this avoidance does not cultivate genuine peace. It only creates a state of dependency. A mind conditioned to require constant external input becomes chronically restless. It may react with speed, but it rarely acts with wisdom. It responds before it truly understands, speaks before it has listened, and moves before it has thought. This high-velocity reactivity might feel like a surge of energy, but in reality, it is a manifestation of instability. Mental strength grows within the pauses. The ability to stop, breathe, and observe before offering a reaction is a sophisticated form of power. This practice creates a vital psychological space between a stimulus and your response. Within that small, quiet space, the faculty of choice finally appears. Without that space, your behavior remains entirely automatic, and ancient patterns of reaction repeat themselves without any internal resistance. Stillness effectively trains the nervous system to settle. When you allow for quiet moments without immediately rushing to fill them with content, your body learns that it is fundamentally safe to be present in the now. Your heart rate begins to stabilize, your respiration deepens, and your attention becomes more unwavering.